In today's video, we will be looking at 3 horrifying caving stories that went terribly wrong. The first one in particular will send chills down your spine. It's a tale of how nature's deception can lead to a tragedy. As for the other 2, they are even more terrifying to watch. As always, viewer discretion is advised. On April 8, 2012, Guillermo Pino Jr., a 24-year-old from San Diego, joined friends and family on a trip to Arroyo Tapiado in Anza Borrego Desert State Park, California. Known for its extensive network of mud caves, the area draws adventurers eager to explore its tunnels, skylights, and unstable pits. Among the attractions was Hidden Cave, a formation notorious for its dangerously deceptive terrain. Pino, impulsive and confident, entered the cave. Casually dressed and barefoot, he explored parts of the cave while the group lingered at the campsite. Without any gear, no flashlight, water, or phone, he climbed through the rugged terrain. Emerging from the upper entrance of the cave, he spotted his companions below and called out, asking for his shoes and inviting them to join him. The group agreed to head up, but told him it would take time to climb the steep incline. Impatient, Pino decided to move further into the cave system alone, calling back and telling he will be just goofing around by then. With that, he disappeared into the upper entrance, his excitement overriding any sense of caution. Pino's steps were steady as he navigated the narrow, sloping passage. Loose dirt crumbled beneath his feet, leaving a trail, and he braced himself against the walls to maintain balance. However, the cave's deceptive nature came into play, and the terrain became more slippery, and the ground was becoming more loose. The trail started to diminish, and by then, Pino had ventured farther along. By that time, his friends climbed up, carrying his shoes. When they arrived at the upper entrance, they expected to see him waiting, but the area was silent. Pino had vanished. They called out and there was no response. Assuming he had gone further inside, they peered into the darkness, but without lights, and couldn't see him anywhere, except for some footsteps. Concern began to creep in. Initial searches revealed no sign of him. And as daylight faded, unease began to settle over the group. While they all tried to stay optimistic about the situation, putting all their faith in their friend that he will return back to them, safe and sound. The story unfolding inside the cave was far from what they would have wanted. Pino had entered a narrow passage within Hidden Cave. The passage sloped downward sharply, and the loose dirt and debris provided no stable footing. Crawling further into the constricting tunnel, Pino realized too late that he had made a grave mistake. Without a flashlight, he was disoriented, his hands feeling blindly along the walls as he tried to find a way out. The path ahead was deceptive. What appeared to be solid ground was a fragile crust of packed dirt and debris. At some point, he attempted to crawl through a vertical crack in a desperate bid to find another exit. The passage was suffocatingly tight, barely wide enough to accommodate his shoulders. Dirt and debris crumbled around him, coating his hands and face in fine dust. Halfway through the passage, disaster struck. The ground beneath him collapsed, sending him plummeting into a vertical shaft, 30 feet into the fissure. The fall struck with a jolting pain, searing through his limbs. By the time he could regain his control, he realized he couldn't move. The situation had gone from bad to worse. In fact, horribly worse. He was not just lost, dehydrated, and severely injured, but now he was stuck tightly. The impact wedged his body into the crack, his torso buried up to his chest in loose dirt. Unable to move, he was ensnared in a relentless nightmare, alone, in excruciating pain, with no hope of rescue, and in a place where darkness was absolute. Above the surface, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Pino's friends and family retraced the paths they thought he might have taken, shouting his name into the silence of the desert. Hidden Cave, like many in the area, is a maze of tight passages and false leads. Without light or proper gear, the search became increasingly futile. Hours passed, and an overwhelming sense of dread grew. By midnight, they reported Pino missing to park authorities. Within hours, local law enforcement had initiated a search effort. No one had the slightest of clues that Pino had become wedged in a crack, dirt cascading around him, pinning him tightly. With each passing second, he was fighting just to stay alive. By the following morning, April 9th, the search for Pino had expanded significantly. Teams from multiple counties, including specialized cave rescue units, joined the effort. Volunteers, professional rescuers, and even U.S. Border Patrol trackers combed the area, focusing on Hidden Cave and the surrounding formations. Pino's family watched anxiously as searchers entered cave after cave, emerging hours later with no news. Rescue teams faced numerous obstacles: unstable entrances, dangerous pits, and a lack of detailed maps for the area's cave systems. The mood among the searchers became increasingly grim as the hours turned into days. Inside the fissure, Pino's condition deteriorated rapidly. The constant pressure on his chest made it increasingly difficult to draw breath. His head throbbed from dehydration, and his lips were cracked and dry. The dirt surrounding him was suffocating, filling his nostrils and mouth whenever he tried to move. As his strength faded, his mind swung between desperation and resignation. He clung to hope that his friends will eventually find him, and this will just go away as a bad memory. But he wasn't aware that he was far from reach. The search efforts were constantly facing hurdles. Every night, the search was called off due to the inherent risks of navigating the caves in darkness. Each morning, teams returned with renewed determination, but no progress. One rescue even commented that, "It's like looking for a needle in a haystack." By April 16th, 8 days had gone by after Pino's disappearance. The San Diego Sheriff's Department officially ended the search. Resources were exhausted, and the likelihood of finding Pino alive had diminished. His family was devastated. They were on the brink of losing hope. Everyone told them it wasn't possible for him to survive by this time, but they, however, refused to give up. They continued to search the area on their own, recruiting volunteers and eventually hiring a private investigator. Pino's mother later recalled, "We couldn't just stop. We knew he was out there somewhere." 27 days after Guillermo Pino's disappearance, the breakthrough finally came. Armed with specialized equipment, including a remote camera, the investigator focused their efforts on Hidden Cave. Lowering the camera into a narrow fissure within the cave, they maneuvered it slowly, peering into spaces that had been previously inaccessible. As the camera's light illuminated the cramped vertical passage, the image that appeared on the screen sent a shockwave of anguish through those present. Pino was there, wedged tightly in the crack. His torso was partially buried in loose dirt and debris. The scene was haunting. There were no signs of life, only the stillness of someone who had succumbed to the conditions long ago. The discovery was devastating, but provided the family with some closure. The challenge now was to retrieve his body from the precarious location. The retrieval process began immediately and would take 3 days. A specialized mine rescue team from Los Angeles joined local cavers to undertake the dangerous and grueling task. One team worked from above, carefully digging through the loose dirt to avoid triggering further collapses. Meanwhile, 2 other teams approached from below, attempting to create enough space to free Pino's body. When Pino's body was finally recovered, an autopsy revealed that he had died of asphyxiation due to the compression of his chest. The exact time of his death could not be determined, but experts believed he likely succumbed within hours of becoming trapped. The tragedy left a lasting impact on those involved. For Pino's family, the grief was compounded by the knowledge of his final moments, alone, trapped, and without hope of rescue. Rescuers, too, were haunted by the incident, some questioning whether anything more could have been done. This next story will showcase that when in Underworld, even when you have done everything right, just a slight malfunction can stir up a nightmare. This story takes place on March 31st, 2012. Wachee Springs, Florida, is known for its crystal-clear waters and vast underwater cave systems, attracting divers from around the world. Among them was 29-year-old Marcin Kay, a skilled and experienced cave diver who had made countless dives into this breathtaking yet treacherous environment. That day, he was diving with the Karst Underwater Research KUR team, a group dedicated to exploring and mapping underwater caves. The team's plan was routine: a series of controlled dives to document passages and ensure the safety of divers navigating these challenging environments. Marcin, confident in his abilities and familiar with the caves, was performing his final dive of the day. He was meticulous in his preparation, double-checking his tanks, equipment, and dive line before descending into the labyrinth below. The dive began smoothly. Marcin and his team followed the guideline, a crucial tether that ensures divers can retrace their steps in the often disorienting maze of underwater caves. They moved in unison, their lights cutting through the dark, silent depths as they documented the cave's features. At depths exceeding 100 feet, the risks were ever present. The slightest mistake could prove fatal. Divers are trained to keep a steady pace to avoid nitrogen buildup in their bloodstream, which can lead to decompression sickness. Marson was aware of these dangers, his every move calculated and precise. As the team completed their objectives and began their ascent, Marson seemed composed. He stayed close to the dive line, methodically navigating through the narrow corridors. At approximately 4:30 p.m., something changed. As the team approached a section near the cave's exit, Marson suddenly veered away from the dive line. He swam upward into a tight crevice, a space so narrow that even side-mount divers would struggle to fit. His movements were rapid and erratic, unlike the deliberate precision he was known for. The other divers, noticing his deviation, attempted to signal him using their dive lights. They flashed beams in his direction, a universal underwater signal for stop. When light signals failed, they tried touch communication, tapping him gently to regain his attention. But Marson's responses were inconsistent and increasingly frantic. He pushed further into the crevice, his body twisting to navigate the restrictive space. Panic rippled through the team as they realized something was wrong. Unbeknownst to the team, Marson was suffering from a cerebral arterial gas embolism. This condition, caused by rapid ascent and subsequent gas expansion in the bloodstream, disrupts blood flow to the brain. Within seconds, the embolism can cause disorientation, confusion, and even blindness or paralysis. Marson's behavior, a sudden departure from the dive line and his irrational decision to enter the crevice, was likely the result of his deteriorating mental state. He was no longer thinking clearly, and his actions became increasingly erratic as the embolism took hold. Safety divers, stationed nearby and equipped with additional gas cylinders, watched helplessly as Marson wedged himself deeper into the crevice. His movements were erratic, and attempts to communicate with him were met with no clear response. 5 minutes passed. Despite their efforts to reach him, Marson's regulator was no longer in use. Divers realized that he had likely lost consciousness. The situation was dire, but the narrow confines of the crevice made reaching him nearly impossible. The team immediately signaled for the surface rescue crew, who were on standby. Every second counted, but underwater rescues are slow by necessity, with divers unable to move too quickly without risking their own safety. When the rescue diver finally reached Marson, it was too late. His body was unresponsive, his tanks still half full, and his equipment functioning properly. The embolism had caused him to lose consciousness and ultimately drown in the tight space where he had become trapped. Marson's body was brought to the surface just before 5 p.m. The recovery team was somber as they emerged from the water, their faces heavy with grief. They had done everything possible, but the unpredictability of an embolism had taken Marson from them in a matter of minutes. In their post-incident statement, the KUR team acknowledged the unpredictable nature of embolisms and the importance of adhering to safety protocols. They emphasized that Marson's decision to enter the crevice was not a deliberate act, but a tragic consequence of his medical condition. His final dive, though tragic, highlighted the profound respect required for the underwater world, a realm of both breathtaking beauty and unforgiving peril. This last incident only happened because of sheer irresponsibility, complete negligence, and not respecting things that matter. On March 13, 2007, Christopher Peake, 27, and 3 companions, including his brother, descended into Turtle Graveyard Cave at 10:15 p.m. for what they believed would be a straightforward exploration. The group brought minimal equipment, 2 flashlights and a couple of chemical lights, and relied on an old 1-inch diameter rope for the vertical descent into the cave. The rope, visibly worn and laid dry from years of use, was their only means of access to the cave's lower chambers. As the group prepared to descend, no one questioned the condition of the rope. It had been used countless times before, even for pulling heavy loads like cars, and its frailty went unnoticed or ignored. Christopher, ready to make his descent, took hold of the rope. Without a helmet, harness, or belay system, he relied solely on his grip and the rope's integrity to guide him down. He moved steadily, hand over hand, into the dimly lit shaft below. From above, Christopher's brother kept a close eye on the rope. As Christopher descended further, the tension caused the fibers to stretch unnaturally thin. The frayed strands began to separate, their weakness now impossible to ignore. His brother shouted down to him, warning him that the rope would snap at any time. Hearing the panic from above, Christopher instinctively tried to speed up his descent, gripping the rope tightly and moving faster than before. Each sudden movement sent shocks through the overstressed rope. The fibers started straining under the weight, making it stretch dangerously. But before Christopher could react, the inevitable happened. Halfway through his descent, the rope suddenly gave way with an audible snap. Dry rotted and brittle, it could no longer bear Christopher's weight. He plunged between 30 and 50 feet, hitting a rocky ledge with a sickening thud. The impact sent him spinning into another free fall, this time dropping another 30 feet. Below, he struck the ground head first, his skull slamming into the unforgiving rock. His body crumpled in a heap. For a moment, everything was silent. Then came shallow, irregular breaths as Christopher drifted in and out of consciousness. Above, his friends and brother were paralyzed with shock. His brother shouted, leaning over the edge, his flashlight beam trembling in his hands. Far below, Christopher groaned but couldn't respond back properly. The group quickly realized they were in an impossible situation. With no other rope or vertical gear, there was no way to descend safely to Christopher. As he drifted in and out of his consciousness, his cries of pain grew louder, begging them to save him. From the dim light above, they could see him writhing in agony. His movements weren't normal. His brother, overcome with emotion, began to climb down using his bare hands, ignoring the warnings of his friends. They grabbed his arms, pulling him back and telling him that it's dangerous. Doing that, he would risk falling down and injuring himself as well. Tears streamed down his brother's face as he reluctantly agreed. Realizing that the time in hand was short, one of the group members on the surface sprinted out of the cave to seek assistance. The others, still shaken, remained in the cave, calling out to Christopher and shining their limited light sources into the darkness. Emergency responders arrived in force, including teams from the Paulette Volunteer Fire Department, Maynardville Fire Department, and Knoxville Volunteer Rescue Squad. Rescue crews immediately assessed the situation and began assembling a vertical raise system. Inside the cave, Christopher's condition was worsening. By now, it was well past midnight, and the frigid cave air compounded the urgency of the rescue. Rescue teams began setting up a vertical raise system to safely extract Christopher. The broken rope still dangled limply from above. It was obvious to the seasoned rescuers that the rope had been severely compromised long before the group's ill-prepared descent. With no reliable rope left, the team had to rig a new system from scratch. Hours passed as they carefully navigated the vertical shaft, their every movement calculated to avoid further risk. By the time rescuers reached Christopher, he was barely conscious. Blood loss and shock had taken their toll. His head injury was severe, and his breathing was labored. Despite his critical condition, he had survived the fall. They stabilized him as best they could and began the arduous task of lifting him to safety. After hours of careful maneuvering, Christopher was lifted out of the cave and airlifted to a nearby hospital. His condition was critical, with severe head trauma and multiple fractures. The others still inside the cave were assisted out by rescue teams, shaken but uninjured. As the rescuers packed up their gear, one veteran member of the team remarked on the group's glaring oversight. "That rope was used for pulling cars. They used it for everything. You have to treat your ropes with respect. Your life hangs on the rope's integrity." It took Christopher months to recover fully, with a lot of medical care and therapy. The experience left him with lasting memories and scars.